Is it right that a family with 2 adults and 2 children should still have to rely on a food bank to get by?
So, Claire, are you referring to your own family situation?
Mine and others that I do know, yeah.
So do you mind me asking, are you both working, for example?
Yeah, we are, yeah.
And what do you do, you and your husband?
I'm a cleaner. My husband works in the transport industry.
And yet, despite that, you have to rely on food banks?
Every now and again, not constantly, yeah.
And how do you feel about that?
It shouldn't be that way. It seems like those that are unemployed get the free dental care, get the free this, get the free that. Yet there's no incentive for those that do work and try. What do we get?
And is there anything specifically you'd want the government to be doing?
Just a little bit more giving to those that do actually work. Instead of, earned that, we'll take that. While you see those that don't give, get given everything on a plate.
Yeah, it's true. The real enemies here are people who have no job, who get paid some of the lowest welfare payments in Europe. They're the ones to blame for the fact that you're in work and you're having to use a food bank, right? Where 40% of people on universal credit are in work currently, right? The real issue there is the fact there are people even lower than you on the totem pole there, people who are literally scraping by on nothing or on welfare assistance payments, right? It's not exactly that you're living the life of Riley, really, is it? Whilst the government, during the pandemic, gave £700 billion to the rich. £700 billion to the rich. And you're here telling us that the real problem is people on welfare payments. Get a sense of fucking perspective. What the hell are you talking about, right? You're falling for the age-old divide and conquer propaganda, right? That same picture you've seen 1,000 times of Rupert Murdoch with all the cookies and then one person with one cookie getting angry at somebody who has no cookies. It's not... Choose your battles, right? Find the real enemy here. And it's the government who's specifically pushing down your wages through deliberate labour market policy so that your wages are now £11,000 on average behind where they would have been if things had been rising since they were before when the Conservatives came to power in 2010. And you're here saying, well, actually, I'm really poor, but the real fault is people even poorer than I am, rather than the super rich who are swanning off with pockets full of their blood money from the government over the course of the pandemic. Jesus Christ.
That's that right?
Okay, let's... Laura, obviously I'm going to come to you on that. Let's just go around the panel to begin with. Janet.
I think what needs to happen is the government needs...
And also, yeah, like you can get free dental treatment if you can find an NHS dentist or very cheap dental treatment. How about dental treatment is included in the NHS, right? How about we have a national dental service, right? Why is it that we means test dentistry so that, myself earning, 50p above minimum wage, I have to pay for dental service that I basically can't afford on my current salary given the cost of living crisis, right? I have toothache on both sides of my mouth on some days. That's how bad my teeth are. Can I afford to get an NHS dentist appointment to get like a tooth extraction? I can't afford it. I definitely can't afford to go private either, right? You're blaming the fact that there are some people who have things subsidised because they're even poorer than you are, rather than the fact that you A, don't get paid enough to afford it in the first place, and B, these things should have been provided with more subsidy, or at the very basic, or the very least should be provided with more subsidy, or could be provided free at point of use, right? Why are you blaming the poor people? What do you have to gain from blaming the poor people?
To look at the rising costs of things like food basics that have soared over the last year. And it's almost as if all the supermarkets are in league together because there's the cost of just buying essentials must have really, really impacted on people. I mean, when you've got stuff like washing powder has gone up from £4.50 to £9 if you're using the environmentally friendly salt that we're supposed to be using, I really don't know how families like yours do cope at all. What can the government do? I think they need to rein in the supermarkets. They need to look at the cost of transport and make it more affordable. I can't, it's things like that, really.
Theo?
Well...
I mean, what do you think when you hear... I mean, there's 2 working adults...
Yeah.
...and they're having, from time to time, to have to go to food banks.
I don't think anybody on this panel would argue that's wrong. I don't think anybody would argue that's wrong. But we don't seem to be able to deal with it. Now, we're talking about inflation going down today. and down to 8.3%, whatever it was. But actually, food inflation is still running at just under 20%. Now, that when it slows down, the prices aren't going to come down. That's my concern, is it would just go up slower. That's all that's going to
I
happen.
mean, if you get a tooth infection, like the abscess that you get from it can infect like the rest of your face. I was once time was very much at threat of that, where I had a gigantic abscess that you could have spread like all the way up into your head and then give you brain damage. That's how dangerous tooth infections can be.
So we know there's a serious issue with food inflation, and that seems to be just brushed under the carpet, and that now needs to be addressed, because we've got to the stage where people can do without lots of things. Mothers and fathers and parents make sacrifices for their children every single day to go without, so their children can get food in their bellies. But the reality now, food's becoming an actual issue in being able to acquire the food in the first place.
And what do you think should be done about that? I mean, at least two.
I'm glad that she pushed him on this, 'cause I was about to say, yeah, brilliant, you've identified the problem. We all know that the cost of living is high. We all know that food inflation is a problem, right? I think most people now get the idea that even though inflation is falling, prices aren't falling, still things are still unaffordable unless you actually get pay rises or more government support, or there's some kind of price capping from the government, right? So action needs to be taken, because you can identify the problems all you want. But unless you tell me what your solution is, unless you can tell me what that solution is, like, that's meaningless to me. That's completely pointless for you to continue grandstanding over how bad you can identify what the problem is.
Two of the big supermarkets didn't make a profit last year. So it's not as if they're making a lot of money off the back of it.
I think it's not fair to blame the supermarkets, because there's a whole supply chain that runs into the supermarkets. And if you talk about fuel costs make a massive difference.
Dying from tooth gum issues is cheaper than paying for dentistry. Capitalism has lost all sense. Unfortunately, Sensibilium, your credit score is not high enough to qualify for life.
To food prices. So they've got to be factored in. The whole supply chain of getting food onto your plate involves so many inflationary affected services. And the problem we've got, we haven't been able... Now, credit where it's due. I think the government stepped in absolutely right on fuel for households to try and protect everybody through the winter. But it didn't deal with the food aspect of it.
All right. OK, well, let's put it to the government. So, Laura, when you hear what Claire has to say there...
And again, he's not even properly addressed the issue with it really is here. And for once, I'm actually going to say that the person who has, the real solution to this, like the Labour government, potential Labour government, does have some of a solution to this, right? A lot of things that's triggering food inflation, as well as the additional supply chain shocks because of the invasion of Ukraine, for example. It's also around the fact that any food that is produced here has a very expensive energy because of the energy crisis, which, as we all know, is down to A, privatisation, and B, is down to an over-reliance on gas. Their desire to want to transform the UK's energy output to be more focused on renewables, which are way, way cheaper than the very expensive price we have to pay for gas, that would reduce the energy expenditure that food production has to pay in the UK, thereby removing costs from the supply end, which means that the costs can come down, right? That's a genuinely good policy that you're getting potentially from the Labour Party, right? Whether it comes to fruition remains to be seen, but at least that's a plan for changing the way in which our energy system works, right? As I said, like, if you're going to start a business, you're going to create a business that's making food, making commodities, right? Producing these things. Why would you come to the UK where energy is 14 per kilowatt hour when you could go to Finland where it's 7 pence per kilowatt hour, right? It makes no sense to do it at all. And there's a reason why these countries which have lower energy costs are being able to keep their food inflation down. Now, obviously, I would be more radical. I would want to change a lot of our capitalist organised grocery retailers into becoming consumer cooperatives. Therefore, they have a vested interest in not profiteering like companies currently are in this country on food specifically, but they would have no incentive to do so because the consumers are the ones who own the cooperative in the first place. So consumer cooperatives would therefore keep prices down by taking away the profit motive that is causing, 50% or so of the inflationary pressures that we are seeing right now. A large amount of inflationary pressures are because of price gouging. You need to be able to take away the profit motive whilst making sure that there is still the production motive through the market of a consumer cooperative to ensure you get the best outcomes as far as consumers are concerned. Put consumers at the heart of grocery retail delivery.
And thank you, Claire, for sharing that with all
Yeah.
of us. We're grateful. How can you help her? She feels that she's being pretty much abandoned.
Yeah, I know it's really, really tough at the moment. We are trying to do all that we can to help. So Theo talked about the energy help that we put through that I'm sure you've been receiving. So we put the windfall tax on the energy companies, which paid half your energy bill over Christmas, but we know it's still really, really high. I totally get that. You've also got the cost of living payments. I hope that you're on that. Maybe you can answer or not afterwards, which, you know, you've got the £300 so far this year. You've got another £600 coming. Hopefully that will help a bit as well.
But it's still, she's still having to go to food banks.
I understand that. I'm just saying, we are giving support, and I hope that is going to help. But the
And the fundamental problem, which actually facing, obviously, the Conservative Party, they're going to continue to face it for decades to come at this point, really, after the shock of the last 3 years or so, right? But also, to a lesser extent, what the Labour Party is promising is not the fundamental restructuring of the economy in favour of the working class that is necessary to be able to change the balance of power in the economy in this country. Because that's where it all comes from, right? The reason why people's wages are low is because of deliberate supply-side labour market policy from the Conservative Party to depress wages. I will say it yet again for those at the back. If wages had properly risen in the way that they were before 2010, on average, people in this country, workers in this country, will be £11,000 per person, quite frankly, better off. This is studies from the Resolution Foundation. That's how far behind our wages are if we actually had proper, not suppressed wages for the entirety of the last 13 years, deliberately so by the Conservative government. They wanted to ensure that they pumped huge amounts of money into the pockets of the rich to be able to speculate on assets and increase asset prices at the expense of everybody else, destroying the middle class in the process, as Gary Stevenson so adequately explains in his video about the asset economy. It was a really good video, well worth watching. And you can keep saying, oh, well, we're giving away loads of cost of living payments. We're spending even more state money to prop up people's wages that aren't being paid good enough, because they know that they exist as a Conservative government to feed into the pockets of the super rich. So by transferring wealth away from working people to the rich through shitty wages, through the kind of labour market reforms that they've engaged in, they can then come back and say, oh no, but we're helping you out by putting money in your pocket. Yeah, more state money, which isn't coming from the taxation of big businesses, because they're not raising capital gains tax, not raising dividends payouts, right? They're not doing a wealth tax or anything like that, right? Most of that is going to come out of the taxation that's coming from working people, because that's where the majority of our taxation comes from, is from income tax, which is too high in comparison to dividends taxes and capital gains tax, which is way too low. And that's how rich people make their money. This idea that you can somehow say, well, we're going to tax the shit out of working people, depress their wages for 13 years, and then pretend that you're going to help them by giving them state handouts, which is essentially just subsidy for shitty wages, that does not create a good economy. All it does is continue siphoning money up to the top.
Long-term solution to this also is trying to get inflation down. And that is what we are absolutely working on. It's starting to come down a bit, but Theo's totally right. Food inflation is still way too high. So we're working to try and improve that. But that is at the root cause of these issues.
Claire, what do you make of that response?
I agree in a way, but there's a little loophole with the universal credit. When you get paid 4 weekly, you get paid 13 times in the year. If you happen to get paid twice in 1 month, you effectively earn too much for universal credit and go without, even though you haven't actually had extra that month.
So that's something you would like to see
There's that
sorted
little
out.
bit that needs to be changed.
Do you know what? Look, I'm the Minister for Pensions, but I'm in the Department of Work and Pensions, and I'll take that away and have a look at that, Claire, because that's a really important thing that you just told me.
Yeah.
Is that the first time you've heard about that?
Well, no, it's
that's
in
a
terms
well-known...
of this,
You see, the government ministers don't even know the proper operations of their own departments, because it's all just been completely subcontracted out to whichever management consultant they think is going to best screw over working people at the time. Because the Conservatives aren't in the business of governance. They're not in the business of crafting policy. They're not in the business of doing their real jobs. They're in the business of getting power, maintaining power, and using it for their own financial benefit and for the benefit of the people who donate to them. Right? That's all they care about. That's all they've ever cared about.
It's a double, in terms of the double payment, I think that's something we need to look at.
Right, because I'm sure that's not the first time that's been brought to the
No,
attention
of
of the government.
course, no.
Manira.
So has it been brought to your attention before or not? Right? What if it was brought to your attention before now? Why haven't you looked at it before? And if it hasn't, and you don't know about it, if it has, sorry, and you don't know about it, then you're crap at your job, right? There's no satisfactory answer to, oh, I didn't know that, to this question.
So Claire, first of all, I'm sorry that you're having to go to food banks. There was a survey that the Liberal Democrats did earlier this week, and we discovered that 1 in 6 parents had gone without a meal or more last year in order to be able to feed their children. As we've heard,
I wish I was on this panel so badly. Oh my God. I have so much to enter into this. And again, I don't know how many times have I said supply-side labour market reform throughout the entirety of this episode of Question Time, where I had to continually try and explain that the reason why wages are so low is deliberate policy. It's deliberate policies to keep wage low, because these people believe, the Conservatives believe in the concept of wage price spirals and shit like that. Right? They're deliberately keeping wages low because they think that wage increases are necessarily inflationary. And they've created a two-tier society between the rich and the poor, or I guess the asset owners and the workers who have no assets, right? And they try to maximise this difference as much as possible because they know that their voter base is stuck in the latter rather than the former. And when the latter go away and they lose their voting base, who the fuck's going to vote for them? Right? Not only is it garbage economics and stupid policy, it's also really bad electioneering. You're essentially letting the entirety of your voter base die out. What are you going to do? They're going to dissipate out of the electorate, and then you won't win another election again.
food inflation is over 19% at the moment. Price of cheese up 40%. It's incredible. One of the things that the Liberal Democrats have called for is a plan to try and tackle food prices. One of the things we called for, actually, we're pleased that the government's already started, which is to get the Competition and Markets Authority has started looking into how all the different players in the food chain are operating, and therefore hopefully not making unwarranted profits when, say, wheat prices are coming down but flour prices are not. We've also called for the energy support that was given to businesses that are part of the food supply chain to not be taken away. For example, farms are really energy intensive, and all that energy support that was being given to businesses has been taken away. So as we've heard, the energy costs are also helping drive up food prices. But also,
you can't just continue subsidising energy payments forever. You actually have to properly change the way we generate our energy. And again, the only parties that are offering credible energy policy long-term to bring these down are the Green Party, and then not even the Greens are good on this, right? The Greens are not giving us nuclear power, which is going to have to be part of the energy mix to be able to have the high levels of energy generation on the cheap to be able to replace gas in the long term, right? But the Labour Party have a plan for loads of public subsidy into private renewable energy. It's all crap. All crap. The closest to credibility on this particular policy is Labour at this point, really and truly.
So particularly for families with children, a passion of mine and something that I've been campaigning on as the Liberal Democrats education spokesperson is to make sure that every family that happens to be on universal credit, that their children is entitled to a free school meal. At the moment, unless you're on £7,400 or less, you can't get a free school meal. And there are 800,000 children living in poverty today who are going to school hungry, don't get a hot meal, they can't learn, they can't thrive, and it's also bad for their educational outcomes and ultimately for our economy. In this day and age, no child should be going hungry. So
yeah, let's be real. Moon power is absolutely fucking based, right? Moon power, we stand moon power in this chat.
I'm begging the government to change the rules on free school meals and introduce those. I'm sorry that also Labour haven't supported that plan when we've pushed it in Parliament, but it is something that I think would really help families so that your children are at least getting fed at school.
Peter.
And also, free school meals is super important to do it across the board. And the reason why it shouldn't be means tested and it should be universal is because it doesn't breed resentment, right? The kind of resentment that you get across this kind of divide and conquer shit with they're getting benefits but I'm not, for example, that we heard from the person who asked this very question. This is why universality is excellent. If everybody gets it, you never ever get resentment from it. It never divides people, right? And I think, and also means testing is usually more cost effective, less cost effective anyway, rather, sorry. Like, you have to pay money to employ people to ensure that the means are tested correctly. People slip through the cracks as well. It's not efficient. Just do it more universality. Universality is good and based, and we should do it more often.
there are so many people in Claire's position, and the thing that is so striking, though, is it's not just a cost of living phenomena, it's not just a post-COVID phenomena. I didn't know what a food bank was until about 8, 9, 10 years ago. There wasn't a single food bank in the community that I live in until 10 years ago. So this is a problem that's been emerging for a long time. There has been now 12 years, year on year, when real terms wages have fallen for people in the public sector and people on lower income. 12 years of real term decline in what your money can buy every single month. Now, we're not going to be able to change this fundamentally, Claire, for you until we get those basics right. The two biggest costs that most households have is the cost of housing and it's the cost of bills. These are now taking up nearly 60 to 70% of people's income. So when it comes to housing, we've got to get cracking with house building, lowering the house cost, so that we can make sure that more good quality housing is available for people at a cost they can afford. That's for home ownership and more rights for the increasing number of people who are in private rented accommodation. Of course, the government have dropped all of their time.
No. Just say the word. Please just say council housing. Just tell us you're going to build council houses. That's all I want you to do. That's all I want to hear is just council housing. Please just tell me you're going to build council houses. For the love of God, that's what this country desperately needs, right? Because it's supply that we know will guarantee to be able to bring prices down. First of all, because it does increase supply in general. It's supply that we know is going to be done on a one-person basis, on a one-in, one-out basis, rather than for private speculation. And because the government is control of the supply and control of the rental payments, it allows you to be able to undercut the private markets, to be able to manipulate the market, to be able to reduce rents as well, right? That's why council housing is the correct option. Just say, well, just let planning regulations go away forever. Build wherever you want. Private developers have at ye, and then they'll build nothing but luxury flats because that's what's most economically valuable. They won't build proper affordable housing because the metrics on what counts as affordable isn't really affordable anyway, and they'll just bulldoze over every single green space that we have available. And speculators will continue buying it and ensure that the prices go up forever because they have the economic incentive to do so. The state has to intervene to bring prices down, and that will only happen through council housing. It has to be council housing. Say the word. Say council housing, Peter.
Targets on this. We need to reinstate those targets and make sure that they're delivered on. On the bills, until we get the essentials of our energy supply market and other utility bills right, then we're not going to get anywhere. So just down the road here, the gas storage facility closed. We're not investing nearly enough in the transition to renewables. If we had started insulating homes when we called for it, 1 million homes would be insulated now. We now need to get to, in the next decade, 10 million homes to be insulated so that we're doing things that will drive down the costs that households have, so that you'll have more.
I mean, we do have some of the worst housing stock in Europe. Our housing stock is terrible, and he is right. We should be doing insulation. But unfortunately, the Jam Man was the one who promised insulation, so that policy is now anti-Semitic.
Money in the pocket. And then finally, we've got to get growth into the economy. If the economy over the last 13 years had grown at the same speed as it had the previous 13 years, because we've had two governments with the same amount of time in office now, then if they had the same growth from that government in this government, then we would have had 45 billion extra pounds to spend just from the growth alone.
The Jam Man refers to Jeremy Corbyn.
We need that kind of growth so that we can make sure it's distributed to those who need it the most. Because I know, Claire, that when you are hungry and you are worried about putting food in your mouth and on the table in the coming weeks, then you're not focused on the things you really should be doing. And that is...
I'm going to push back on that, Big Al. Like, I don't think the fact that he specifically said we need growth to be able to redistribute it, that's like the first time I've heard a representative of the Labour Party on any of these panels specifically talk about growth specifically for redistribution, right? There's no problem with economic growth as long as you're specifically saying we want to grow the economy to benefit working people, right? And it's for a very, very long time, that's not been the message that we've gotten from Labour Party. It's been the grow the pie list Trussism type stuff, which that rhetoric needs to die, it needs to go away forever, right? But the fact that he's coming here and saying we need to grow the economy to redistribute it, that's the first time I've heard that. And I think that's a step in the right direction, at the very least, right? Probably not going to actually happen when it comes down to brass tacks, come down to policy, but rhetorically it's at least a step above what we're getting from Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer.
making a better life for you and your family and the community that you live in. We've got to get back so that we can have some hope back in our communities, hope back in our lives that actually things can get better. And believe me, they can.
Claire, we wish you all the best, and thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It does help out the channel and the algorithm. And if you click the bell notification icon, it will let you know when I go live and when I upload videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my handle is @NoJusticeMTG, and that is Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to support my channel in a more financial manner, you can do so by becoming a member for just 99p, by super chatting, or by supporting me on Patreon, with the link is in the description of this video, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next segment.